The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slammed shut with a sound that echoed through the enormous hall. Ambassador Jake Morrison had just walked out, taking with him any hope of peace between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The silence that followed was deafening. Counselor Zexthara stood frozen at her podium, her blue crystalline skin flickering with nervous energy. In all her 200 years of diplomatic service, she had never seen anything like this. The humans had simply said no to everything. Every treaty, every compromise, every carefully worded agreement that had taken months to create. They rejected it all. "This is madness," whispered Counselor Veltar from the Andromedan Republic. His four eyes blinked rapidly as he processed what had just happened. They cannot simply leave. The treaties bind them to this council. But the humans had done exactly that. They had walked away from 3 centuries of galactic cooperation. The chamber buzzed with frantic conversations in dozens of alien languages. Some species looked angry, others seemed confused, and a few appeared genuinely frightened. High above the chamber floor, Captain Lisa Bennett watched the chaos unfold through the view screen of her ship, the Defiance. She had been monitoring the council proceedings from orbit, waiting for this exact moment. The coded message from Earth had been clear. If the talks failed, humanity would withdraw completely from galactic politics. "Captain," said Lieutenant Jim Parker from the communications station, "we're receiving withdrawal orders from all human outposts. Operation Exodus is officially active." Lisa nodded grimly. She had hoped it would not come to this, but the Council had pushed too far. For years, they had treated humanity like children who needed guidance. They had limited human expansion, restricted their technology sharing, and demanded compliance with laws that seemed designed to keep humans weak. The view screen showed the vast Council station growing smaller as the Defiance pulled away. Around them, dozens of other human ships were doing the same. Military vessels, trade ships, research craft, and civilian transports all began their journey back to human space. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying. Back on the station, Chancellor Mordeth of the Centauri Alliance called for order. His voice boomed through the chamber's speakers, but the panic was already spreading. Emergency communications were flooding in from across the galaxy. Human forces were withdrawing from peacekeeping missions. Human merchants were abandoning their trade routes. Human researchers were packing up their laboratories. "We must contact them immediately," demanded General Korath of the Toran military caste. His warrior species had relied heavily on human tactical support in their border conflicts. They cannot abandon their duties to the galaxy, but Ambassador Jake Morrison was already gone. His shuttle had departed the station 20 minutes ago, and long-range sensors showed it heading directly for the hyperspace jump point that led to Earth. The humans were not coming back. Dr. Amanda Cross sat in her research lab aboard the Science vessel Discovery, watching her alien colleagues work frantically to copy human data files. The withdrawal order had given all human personnel exactly 1 hour to gather their personal belongings and prepare for departure. Everything else had to be left behind or destroyed. "Dr. Cross," said her assistant, Dr. Keelix from Rigel 7, "surely you can delay this departure. Our research on quantum genetics is too important to abandon." Amanda shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry, Keelix. The orders are absolute. All human personnel must return to Earth space immediately." The consequences were already becoming clear. Without human involvement, several ongoing research projects would fail. Medical treatments that could save millions of lives would be delayed by decades. Technologies that could revolutionize space travel would remain undeveloped. On the planet Zerion Prime, Danny Cooper was coordinating the evacuation of the largest human mining operation in Council space. The Kepler Mining Consortium employed over 50,000 humans and twice as many aliens. The withdrawal meant abandoning facilities worth billions of credits and leaving thousands of alien workers without jobs. "Sir," said his foreman, Pete Williams, "the Zerion government is begging us to stay. They're offering us complete autonomy over the mining sector." Danny looked out at the massive extraction platforms that stretched to the horizon. "It doesn't matter what they offer, Pete. Earth has spoken, we're going home." The economic impact was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Stock markets across the galaxy were crashing as investors realized the scope of the human withdrawal. The Galactic Trade Network, which had relied on human shipping for protection, was reporting massive losses as pirate attacks increased on undefended routes. Colonel Ryan Stone stood in the central command center of Fort Liberty, the largest human military base outside Earth space. Around him, officers coordinated the massive logistics operation of withdrawing 2 million human military personnel from hundreds of worlds. "Colonel," reported Major Susan Clark, "the Altarians are requesting that we maintain our peacekeeping force on their border with the hegemony. They're offering us sovereign territory in exchange." Ryan shook his head. "Negative, Major. All forces return to Earth space. No exceptions." The military withdrawal was perhaps the most shocking aspect of humanity's departure. Human forces had been the backbone of galactic security for over a century. They had prevented dozens of wars and maintained peace between hostile species. Without them, old conflicts were already beginning to resurface. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Lisa Bennett received reports from across human space. The withdrawal was proceeding smoothly, but the reactions from alien governments were becoming increasingly desperate. Some were offering massive concessions to convince humans to stay. Others were making threats about the consequences of abandonment. "Captain," said Commander Alex Davis, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian Empire. They're demanding that we reconsider our withdrawal from the neutral zone." "Tell them to direct their concerns to the Galactic Council," Lisa replied coldly. "We no longer recognize their authority over human actions." The message was clear. Humanity was done playing by rules written by others. They would forge their own path among the stars with or without galactic approval. The old order was crumbling and something new was about to take its place. As the last human ships cleared council space, the galaxy held its breath. 3 centuries of cooperation had ended in a single day. The question now was whether the remaining species could maintain peace without human guidance, or if the galaxy would descend into the chaos that humans had spent generations preventing. The shockwave of humanity's departure would ripple through every corner of known space, changing the balance of power forever. 3 days had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the effects were spreading like wildfire across known space. What had started as a political protest was quickly becoming a galaxy-wide crisis that nobody had anticipated. Danny Cooper stood in his office aboard the mobile command ship New Horizon, watching the evacuation of mining platform Delta 7 through the massive viewport. The Kepler Mining Consortium had operated on 17 different worlds across Council space, employing both humans and aliens in massive extraction operations. Now all of it was being abandoned. "Sir," said his operations manager, Carol Wright, "the Xerian government is offering us a permanent treaty if we just keep 3 platforms operational. They say their economy will collapse without the rare earth exports." Danny turned away from the window. "Carol, we've been over this. Earth's orders are clear. We pull out everything and everyone. Let the council deal with the economic mess they created." The mining withdrawal was just one part of a larger economic disaster. Human corporations had become deeply integrated into galactic commerce over the past 3 centuries. They provided shipping security, advanced manufacturing techniques, and cutting-edge technology that many alien civilizations had grown dependent on. Dr. Amanda Cross sat in her temporary laboratory aboard the research vessel Endeavour, reading reports from scientists across the galaxy. The withdrawal of human researchers was causing immediate problems in dozens of critical projects. Medical research that could have saved millions of lives was being halted. Environmental restoration projects were being canceled. Even basic agricultural programs were failing without human expertise. "Dr. Cross," said her colleague Dr. Henry Wells, looking up from his data tablet, "I'm getting emergency requests from the Altarian medical centers. The genetic therapy we developed for their plague outbreak requires weekly adjustments. Without our support, people are going to die." Amanda felt a heavy weight in her chest. "I know, Henry, but we can't help them while they're still supporting the Council's restrictions on our sovereignty. Maybe this will convince them to change their position." The medical crisis was spreading faster than anyone expected. Human doctors had been working on over 40 different worlds, treating diseases that local physicians couldn't handle. Human-developed medications were running out in alien hospitals, and there were no immediate alternatives available. On the military front, Colonel Ryan Stone was coordinating the withdrawal of peacekeeping forces from 12 active conflict zones. The Tauran hegemony border dispute had already erupted into open warfare within hours of the human peacekeepers leaving. The death toll was climbing rapidly. "Colonel," reported Captain Steve Johnson from the communications center, "we're receiving desperate pleas from both sides of the Vega sector conflict. They want us to return immediately and restore the ceasefire." Ryan studied the tactical displays, showing the expanding combat zones. "Negative, Captain. They had 300 years to learn how to solve their own problems. It's time they started trying." The military withdrawal was having the most immediate and visible impact. Human forces had been stationed on over 60 worlds, maintaining peace between hostile species and protecting smaller civilizations from aggressive neighbors. Without their presence, old territorial disputes were flaring back to life with deadly results. Captain Lisa Bennett commanded the escort fleet protecting the massive convoy of evacuating human civilians. Over 2 million humans had been living and working throughout Council space, and getting them all home safely was a logistical nightmare. The convoy stretched across several light years, with military vessels protecting hundreds of civilian transports. "Captain," said Navigator Tony Mitchell, "we're receiving distress calls from the Rigel commercial station. Pirates have attacked 3 merchant convoys in the past 2 days. The station administrator is begging for our protection." Lisa checked her orders again. "Our mission is to protect human civilians during evacuation. Council space security is no longer our responsibility." The piracy problem was exploding across the galaxy. Human naval patrols had kept the major shipping lanes safe for decades. With those patrols gone, criminal organizations were moving quickly to take advantage of the security vacuum. Merchant ships from dozens of species were being attacked and robbed. General Vexmore of the Zephyrian Empire stood before a massive tactical display in his command center, studying the positions of human fleets. What troubled him most was not where the humans were, but where they were not. Strategic positions that had been protected for generations were now empty. Border regions that had been stable were becoming unpredictable. "General," said his intelligence chief, "our analysis suggests the humans are establishing a defensive perimeter around their core systems. They're not threatening anyone, but they're also not offering protection to anyone." Vexmore nodded grimly. The humans had effectively created a power vacuum in their wake. Species that had relied on human protection were now vulnerable, while aggressive civilizations saw opportunities for expansion that hadn't existed in centuries. The technological impact was becoming equally severe. Dr. Kevin Walsh monitored communications from the human intelligence outpost at Wolf 359, intercepting desperate messages between alien governments. The faster-than-light communication networks that connected the galaxy relied heavily on human-maintained relay stations. Several major communication hubs had already gone offline. "Dr. Walsh," said technician Mary Garcia, "the Andromedan Republic is reporting complete communication blackouts in 3 sectors. They're asking if we can at least maintain the emergency channels." Kevin shook his head. "All non-essential human infrastructure is being shut down or relocated. If they want our technology, they need to negotiate directly with Earth." The communication breakdown was creating chaos in galactic politics. The Council's ability to coordinate responses between member species was severely compromised. Emergency sessions were being delayed because representatives couldn't communicate with their home governments. Trade negotiations were failing because real-time data couldn't be transmitted. Back on the Council station, Chancellor Mordeth convened an emergency session with the remaining member species. The chamber felt strangely empty without the human delegation, and the mood was growing increasingly desperate. "We must face the reality," Mordeth announced to the assembly. "The human withdrawal is not a negotiating tactic. They have genuinely severed all ties with this council. We need to decide how to proceed without them." Councillor Zex Thera stood to address the chamber. Perhaps we should consider reaching out to them individually outside of council channels. Many human corporations and institutions might be willing to negotiate separate agreements. The suggestion caused an uproar among the delegates. Some species supported the idea of bypassing the council structure, while others insisted that maintaining unity was essential. The debate quickly devolved into accusations and threats as species blamed each other for pushing humanity too far. The economic markets continued their downward spiral. The Galactic Stock Exchange had lost 30% of its value in 3 days. Currency values were fluctuating wildly as traders tried to predict which civilizations would survive the human withdrawal and which would collapse. Ben Parker, the Human Trade Minister, watched the market reports from his office on Earth. Thereby, withdrawal was costing humanity enormous amounts of money in abandoned infrastructure and lost contracts, but the long-term strategic benefits were already becoming apparent. "Sir," said his assistant Janet Stone, "we're receiving unofficial trade proposals from over 40 different species. They want to negotiate directly with Earth, bypassing the Council entirely." Ben smiled grimly. "That's exactly what we hoped would happen, Janet. The Council claimed to speak for the galaxy, but it turns out individual species have very different priorities when their survival is at stake." The ripple effect was accelerating. What had begun as humanity's rejection of Council authority was becoming a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. The old order was breaking down, and the question now was, what would rise to replace it? 1 week after humanity's dramatic exit from galactic politics, the desperation among alien civilizations had reached critical levels. The carefully maintained order that had existed for centuries was crumbling, and species that had never imagined life without human involvement were scrambling to find solutions. Chancellor Mordeth stood alone in his private chambers aboard the Council station, staring out at the stars through the massive viewport. The emergency sessions had become increasingly chaotic as member species blamed each other for the crisis. 3 species had already withdrawn from the Council entirely, choosing to pursue direct negotiations with Earth instead. "Chancellor," his aide announced through the intercom, "the Pelican Federation has requested an immediate private meeting. They say it's urgent." Mordeth sighed heavily. "Send them in." Ambassador Kreloth of the Pelican Federation entered the chamber, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. The Federation controlled 7 star systems that depended heavily on human-protected trade routes. Without that protection, their economy was collapsing rapidly. "Chancellor," Kreloth began, "my government has made a decision. We are formally requesting permission to negotiate separately with the humans. Our people are suffering, and the Council has offered no viable alternatives." The request hit Mordeth like a physical blow. "Ambassador, you know such action would violate our unity charter. If we allow individual negotiations, the Council becomes meaningless." Kreloth's expression hardened. "The Council is already meaningless, Chancellor. It failed to prevent this crisis, and it has no plan to resolve it. My people will not starve while we debate diplomatic protocol." After the ambassador left, Mordeth realized that the Pelican Federation would not be the last to abandon the Council approach. Desperation was driving species to seek any solution that might restore stability to their worlds. On the industrial planet of Nexus Prime, Alex Rodriguez supervised the shutdown of the last human-operated manufacturing complex. The facility had employed 12,000 beings from 6 different species, producing advanced electronics that were exported throughout the galaxy. Now the production lines stood silent, and the workers faced an uncertain future. "Mr. Rodriguez," said Plant Supervisor Zektar, a member of the insectoid hive species, "our people have worked alongside humans for 3 generations. We know your manufacturing processes better than our own governments do. Can we not continue this operation independently?" Alex shook his head sadly. "Zektar, the equipment is licensed human technology. Without our technicians and software updates, these machines will fail within months. I'm sorry, but we have our orders." The manufacturing crisis was spreading across dozens of worlds. Human engineering had become so integrated into galactic industry that removing it left massive gaps in production capacity. Entire planetary economies were grinding to a halt as factories closed and supply chains collapsed. Admiral Sarah Blake monitored the situation from her flagship, the Constitution, stationed at the edge of human space. Intelligence reports showed increasing military movements among Council species as traditional alliances began to fracture. Border disputes that had been dormant for decades were suddenly active again. Admiral, reported intelligence officer Carl Wright, the Andromedan Republic is mobilizing their entire fleet. Our analysts believe they're preparing to secure the Vega sector mining rights by force. Sarah studied the tactical displays. And the Centauri response? 3 battle groups, moving toward the same sector. It looks like we're going to see the first major war in over a century, ma'am. The military situation was deteriorating rapidly. Human peacekeeping forces had maintained stability between dozens of competing civilizations. Without that buffer, aggressive species were eyeing their neighbors' territories with renewed interest. The galaxy was sliding toward a level of conflict not seen since humanity first entered galactic politics. Dr. Nicole Roberts worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the medical ship Mercy, trying to produce enough vaccine for the plague outbreak on Kepler-6. The disease had been contained for years through regular human medical intervention, but the withdrawal had left the planet defensively exposed to the returning epidemic. "Doctor," said her assistant, Dr. Paul Green, "we can produce maybe 10,000 doses with our remaining supplies. The planet needs at least 50,000 to prevent a catastrophe." Nicole slammed her hand against the laboratory table in frustration. "I know the numbers, Paul, but we can't help them while their government still supports the Council's restrictions on human sovereignty. Maybe watching their people die will convince them to change their position." The medical crisis was creating political pressure that no alien government had anticipated. Populations were demanding that their leaders do whatever necessary to restore human medical support. Several planetary governments were facing internal revolutions as their people refused to accept the consequences of the Council's failed policies. Dr. Kevin Walsh continued monitoring communications from his intelligence post, intercepting increasingly desperate messages between alien governments. The technological dependence on human systems was proving far more extensive than anyone had realized. Dr. Walsh, reported technician Lisa Martinez, "We're intercepting emergency communications from the Zephyrian Empire. Their entire orbital defense network is failing. Apparently it relied on human-maintained quantum processors that are shutting down one by one." Kevin reviewed the technical specifications. "Those processors require manual reset codes every 30 days. Without our technicians, their entire defense grid will be offline within a week." The technological crisis was exposing just how dependent the galaxy had become on human innovation. Communication networks, defense systems, transportation infrastructure, and industrial equipment all relied on human-developed technology that required ongoing support. As these systems failed, alien civilizations were discovering that they had traded their technological independence for convenience. On the planet, Haven 5 Ambassador Jake Morrison found himself in an unusual position. Instead of returning to Earth as originally ordered, he had established an unofficial embassy on the neutral world. Alien representatives who had once treated him with condescension were now requesting private meetings, desperate to find some way to reconnect with humanity. "Ambassador Morrison," said Trade Representative Velthara of the Rigel Consortium, "my government is prepared to offer significant concessions for renewed human involvement in our sector. We can negotiate planetary sovereignty, military cooperation, even technology sharing agreements." Jake listened politely, but his instructions from Earth were clear. "Representative Velthara, humanity is no longer interested in partial solutions or temporary agreements. If your government wants our cooperation, they need to recognize our complete independence from Council authority." The diplomatic overtures were becoming increasingly desperate. Species that had supported the Council's restrictions on human expansion were now offering exactly what humanity had been demanding for decades. But the offers were coming too late, and trust had been broken too thoroughly for easy repair. "Captain," Lisa Bennett received reports from across the evacuation convoy. The withdrawal was proceeding ahead of schedule, but the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. Refugee ships from conflict zones were appearing daily, their occupants fleeing wars that had erupted in humanity's absence. "Captain," said Communications Officer Greg Davis, "we're receiving a distress call from a Centauri civilian transport. They're requesting safe passage through our convoy. Their home system is under attack by Andromedan forces." Lisa checked her orders again. "We can provide humanitarian assistance to refugees, but we cannot intervene in conflicts between Council species. Direct them to the nearest neutral port and provide basic medical aid if needed." The refugee crisis was growing daily. As conflicts erupted across the galaxy, civilian populations were fleeing their homeworlds in massive numbers. The human convoy was becoming a magnet for desperate beings seeking safety, but Earth's orders strictly limited humanitarian involvement. The economic warfare was intensifying as species competed for the remaining human contracts. The Terra Trade Corporation, operating from Earth space, was receiving offers that exceeded previous agreements by enormous margins. Species were bidding against each other for access to human technology and protection. Ben Parker coordinated these negotiations from his office on Luna Station, implementing humanity's new selective engagement policy. "Janet," he told his assistant, "prioritize species that support our independence. The Council loyalists can wait until they change their position." The strategy was working exactly as planned. Individual species were beginning to break ranks, with the Council position choosing practical survival over political unity. The monolithic opposition to human demands was fracturing as reality set in. As the second week of the crisis began, the galaxy looked nothing like it had a month earlier. Ancient enemies were mobilizing for war, economic systems were collapsing, and technological infrastructure was failing. The human withdrawal had exposed just how dependent the galactic civilization had become on their involvement. The question now was whether the remaining species could adapt to the new reality, or whether the galaxy. 2 weeks after humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, the true price of independence was becoming clear to everyone involved. The galaxy was transforming rapidly, and not all the changes were positive for either humans or aliens. Ambassador. Jake Morrison sat in his makeshift office on Haven Station, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. His unofficial embassy had become the most sought-after diplomatic posting in known space. Every day brought new representatives from species, desperate to establish some connection with humanity outside Council channels. "Ambassador," said his aide, Lieutenant Karen Phillips, "we have 17 different species requesting meetings today. The Altarian Collective is offering to withdraw from the Council entirely if we'll resume medical support for their plague zones." Jake rubbed his tired eyes. The position he had taken was both unprecedented and exhausting. Earth had not officially sanctioned his embassy, but they had not ordered him to close it either. He was walking a thin line between following orders and responding to genuine humanitarian crises. Schedule the Altarians for this afternoon, he decided. But make it clear that any agreement requires complete recognition of human sovereignty and withdrawal from Council membership. The diplomatic revolution was accelerating. Species that had been loyal Council members for centuries were beginning to question whether their allegiance was worth the devastating consequences of the human withdrawal. The monolithic opposition to human demands was cracking under the pressure of reality. Dr. Nicole Roberts stood in the emergency medical center she had established aboard the hospital ship Compassion, treating refugees from the growing conflicts. The ship was stationed just outside Council space, providing humanitarian aid to beings fleeing the chaos that had erupted in humanity's absence. "Doctor," said Nurse Commander Betty Clark, "we're receiving distress calls from the Vega sector. The war between the Andromedans and Centauri has spread to 3 more systems. Civilian casualties are in the millions." Nicole felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Every human decision had consequences, and watching civilizations tear themselves apart was harder than she had anticipated. "We can treat the refugees who reach us, but we cannot intervene in the conflict itself. Earth's orders are clear." The medical crisis was expanding beyond anyone's worst predictions. Diseases that had been controlled for generations were returning to worlds that had lost human medical support. The plague on Kepler-6 had already killed over 2 million beings, and similar outbreaks were spreading to other systems. Captain Lisa Bennett commanded the Defense Fleet's border patrol, monitoring the edge of human space for threats. The withdrawal had been completed successfully, but the consequences were following humanity home. Refugee fleets, pirate raiders, and even military scouts from various alien species were testing human resolve. "Captain," reported Tactical Officer Ron Martinez, "we have a Zephyrian battlecruiser approaching our border. They're requesting permission to pursue pirates who attacked their supply convoy." Lisa checked her tactical display. "Denied. Inform them that human space is closed to all military vessels from Council species. They can pursue their pirates elsewhere." The security situation was becoming increasingly complex. Criminal organizations were using the chaos in Council space to launch raids against human territories. Protecting the border required constant vigilance and a willingness to turn away even former allies who were seeking help. On Earth, President Angela Hayes addressed the Global Assembly in an emergency session. The decision to withdraw from galactic politics had been controversial even among humans, and the growing crisis was creating political pressure to reconsider. "The images coming from the conflict zones are heartbreaking," President Hayes acknowledged. "But we cannot continue to sacrifice human interests for the sake of aliens who refuse to treat us as equals. Our withdrawal is exposing the true nature of galactic civilization, and it is not pretty." The political debate on Earth was intense. Humanitarian groups demanded that human medical teams be allowed to help with the plague outbreaks. Peace activists called for renewed peacekeeping efforts to stop the spreading wars, but the government held firm to its policy of complete disengagement from Council affairs. Danny Cooper coordinated the evacuation of the last human mining operations from Council space, watching as decades of infrastructure was abandoned or destroyed. The economic cost to humanity was enormous, but the strategic benefits were already becoming apparent. "Sir," said Operations Manager Carol Wright, "the Zarian government has collapsed. 3 different factions are fighting for control of the planet, and they're all trying to hire human mercenaries to support their causes." Danny shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not getting involved in their civil war. Let them sort out their own problems." The economic consequences were spreading in unexpected directions. Planetary governments that had depended on human-protected trade were collapsing as their economies failed. The resulting civil wars and refugee crises were creating secondary problems that affected neighboring systems. Dr. Kevin Walsh monitored the breakdown of galactic communication networks from his intelligence post. The technological infrastructure that connected hundreds of civilizations was failing systematically as human-maintained systems went offline. Dr. Walsh, reported analyst Gary Thompson, were intercepting emergency broadcasts from the Council station. Their primary communication array failed yesterday and they can't reach over 60% of their member species. Kevin studied the data streams. The cascade failure is accelerating. Within a month, most long-range communication in Council space will be impossible without our relay stations. The technological crisis was proving to be more devastating than military conflict. Civilizations that had grown dependent on human innovation were discovering that they lacked the expertise to maintain the systems they had taken for granted. The galaxy was effectively reverting to pre-human technological levels in many sectors. Admiral Sarah Blake received intelligence reports indicating that several aggressive species were mobilizing large fleets, taking advantage of the power vacuum created by human withdrawal. The hegemony of worlds had already conquered 2 minor civilizations, claiming they were restoring order to chaotic regions. "Admiral," said Intelligence Chief Major Scott Williams, "the Toran military caste is massing forces along their border with the Pelican Federation. Our analysts believe they're planning a full-scale invasion within the week." Sarah reviewed the tactical assessments. "The Federation was one of our closest allies. Their defense strategy was built around human support that no longer exists. This is going to be a massacre." The military situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Species that had relied on human protection were being targeted by aggressive neighbors who saw opportunity in the chaos. The galaxy's balance of power was shifting rapidly toward the most militaristic civilizations. On Luna Station, Trade Minister Ben Parker managed humanity's new selective commerce policies. The economic pressure was forcing species to choose between loyalty to the Council and practical survival needs. "Sir," said Assistant Director Janet Stone, "we now have formal trade agreements with 18 species that have withdrawn from Council membership. The economic incentives are working exactly as planned." Ben nodded with satisfaction. "And the Council loyalists?" "Struggling badly. The Rigel Consortium's economy has contracted by 40%. The Andromedan Republic is facing food shortages because their agricultural systems depended on human biotechnology. The economic warfare was proving devastatingly effective. Species that chose to maintain Council membership were being systematically excluded from human trade and technology sharing. The economic pressure was forcing difficult choices between political principles and practical survival." Back on Haven Station, Ambassador Jake Morrison concluded another day of desperate negotiations. Representatives from dozens of species had pleaded for exceptions to humanity's withdrawal policy. Some offered enormous concessions, others made threats, and a few simply begged for mercy. "Ambassador," said Lieutenant Karen Phillips as she prepared the daily reports, "the situation is getting worse every day. How long can we maintain this position?" Jake looked out at the stars through his office viewport. "As long as it takes, Karen. We spent 3 centuries accommodating their demands and accepting their limitations on our sovereignty. Now they're learning what the galaxy looks like without human involvement. The transformation was painful for everyone. Human conscience struggled with the suffering their withdrawal was causing, while alien civilizations grappled with their dependence on human support. But the lesson was clear. The galaxy needed humanity far more than humanity needed the galaxy. The price of independence was high, but after centuries of being treated as junior partners in their own civilization, humans were finally learning their true value in the cosmic community. The question now was whether the galaxy could adapt to a new reality, where humanity set its own terms for engagement. 6 months had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to its former self. The old order had collapsed completely, replaced by something entirely new and unmistakably human in character. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching the steady stream of ships arriving and departing from the massive diplomatic facility. What had begun as an unofficial embassy on Haven Station had evolved into the political center of a new galactic order. The station rivaled the old council chambers in size and exceeded them in efficiency. "Ambassador," said his chief of staff, Director Helen Carter, "the Altarian delegation has arrived for the formal signing ceremony. They're the 43rd species to join the Commonwealth this month." Jake nodded with satisfaction. The Terran Commonwealth had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. What started as humanity's declaration of independence had become a beacon for species seeking an alternative to the Council's rigid hierarchies and bureaucratic inefficiencies. The Commonwealth operated on principles that seemed revolutionary to most alien species: voluntary membership, equal representation regardless of species size, and mutual defense agreements that protected smaller civilizations from aggressive neighbors. It was everything the old council had claimed to be but never actually achieved. Dr. Nicole Roberts walked through the medical center aboard New Geneva Station, observing the collaborative work being done by human and alien doctors. The Commonwealth's approach to medical cooperation had revolutionized galactic healthcare in ways the Council had never managed. "Dr. Roberts," said Dr. Kamal Ozil, a human researcher working alongside colleagues from 6 different species, "the Joint Research Program has produced more medical advances in 6 months than the Council sponsored in 6 years." Nicole smiled as she watched the integrated teams working together. When species choose to cooperate instead of being forced to comply, the results speak for themselves. The medical revolution was one of the Commonwealth's greatest successes. By sharing human technology freely with member species while allowing them to contribute their own expertise, medical science was advancing at unprecedented rates. Diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries were being conquered through genuine cooperation. Admiral Sarah Blake commanded the Commonwealth Defense Fleet from her flagship, the Liberty. The fleet had grown enormously as former council species sought protection under human military leadership. More importantly, it operated under rules of engagement that prioritized defense over conquest. "Admiral," reported Fleet Captain David Lee, "the hegemony of worlds is massing forces along the border with the Pelican Federation. Intelligence suggests they're planning another invasion attempt." Sarah reviewed the tactical displays showing Commonwealth fleet positions. "Deploy the Third Fleet to Federation space. Make it clear that Commonwealth members are under our protection. The hegemony can expand elsewhere." The military transformation was perhaps the most visible change in galactic politics. The Commonwealth Defense Fleet had become the most powerful force in known space, but it used that power differently than any previous galactic military. Instead of maintaining imperial control, it protected member species' sovereignty while deterring aggression from hostile neighbors. The old Galactic Council still existed, but its influence had shrunk to insignificance. Only the most conservative species remained loyal to its authority, and even they were beginning to question whether their allegiance was worth the isolation from Commonwealth benefits. Chancellor Mordeth sat alone in his office aboard the Council station, reading reports of yet another species defecting to the Commonwealth. The Andromedan Republic had announced their intention to join just that morning, taking with them 3 star systems and the Council's largest remaining military contribution. "Chancellor," his aide announced, "the Centauri Alliance is requesting an emergency session. They want to discuss dissolving the Council entirely and negotiating individual membership in the Commonwealth." Mordeth closed his eyes in defeat. "Schedule the session. I suppose it's time to admit that our experiment in galactic unity has failed." The Council's collapse was inevitable once species realized they had alternatives. The Commonwealth offered everything the Council had promised but actually delivered on those promises. Democratic representation, economic prosperity, technological advancement, and military security were not just words in Commonwealth treaties. They were measurable realities. On the industrial world of Nexus Prime, production manager Alex Rodriguez supervised the reopening of manufacturing facilities under Commonwealth management. The integrated approach to industrial development was producing results that amazed even human engineers. "Mr. Rodriguez," said his deputy Sandra Walsh, "the new production figures are incredible. By combining human efficiency with hive species, precision, and Centauri innovation, we're exceeding pre-withdrawal output by 300%. Alex watched the bustling factory floors where beings from dozens of species worked together seamlessly. That's what happens when cooperation replaces competition as the organizing principle. The economic transformation was staggering. Commonwealth trade agreements operated on principles of mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Smaller species were not forced to accept unfavorable terms, and technological sharing flowed in all directions. The result was prosperity levels that the galaxy had never seen. Dr. Kevin Walsh coordinated the Commonwealth's communication networks from his headquarters on Terra Station. The technological infrastructure connecting member worlds was more advanced and reliable than anything the Council had ever achieved. Dr. Walsh, reported Systems Manager Greg Foster, the new quantum relay network is fully operational. We now have instantaneous communication across 87 star systems with 99% reliability. Kevin smiled as he watched the data streams flowing between Commonwealth worlds. The old council claimed their communication problems were unavoidable. Turns out they were just incompetent. The technological revolution was enabling political and economic changes that would have been impossible under the old system. Real-time, democratic participation across multiple star systems, instant economic transactions, and coordinated military responses were transforming how galactic civilization functioned. Captain Lisa Bennett commanded the patrol fleet protecting Commonwealth space from the remnants of hostile forces. The security situation had stabilized dramatically as the new order established itself. But vigilance was still required against species that refused to accept the changed reality. "Captain," reported Security Chief Tom Bradley, "we're tracking hegemony raiding fleet approaching the Outer Rim. They appear to be targeting refugee ships from former Council worlds." Lisa checked her authorization codes. "Intercept and destroy if they refuse to withdraw. Commonwealth space is closed to hostile forces. The military doctrine was simple but effective. Absolute protection for Commonwealth members and devastating retaliation against aggressors. The policy had ended most conflicts simply by making aggression too costly to attempt. President Angela Hayes addressed the Commonwealth Assembly from the chambers aboard New Geneva Station. Representatives from over 60 species listened as she outlined the next phase of galactic development. 6 months ago, humanity chose independence over subjugation, President Hayes declared. Today, we have created something greater than independence. We have built a community where every species can thrive according to their own nature, while contributing to the common good. The political evolution was continuing to surprise everyone involved. The Commonwealth had grown beyond its human origins, to become something genuinely multi-species in character. Human leadership was accepted not because of military dominance, but because human principles had proven successful in practice. Trade Minister Ben Parker reviewed the economic reports from his office on Luna Station. The numbers told the story of a galactic economy that was not just recovering from the council collapse but actually thriving under the new system. "Sir," said economic analyst Mary Johnson, "Commonwealth gross production has increased by 400% since formation. Living standards are rising on every member world, and resource conflicts have virtually disappeared." Ben studied the trade flow charts showing the complex web of agreements connecting Commonwealth worlds. When species cooperate voluntarily, instead of being forced into compliance, everyone benefits. The economic success was driving political change across the galaxy. Even species that had initially opposed the Commonwealth were beginning to reconsider as their populations demanded access to the prosperity they saw in member worlds. As the first anniversary of humanity's withdrawal approached, the transformation was complete. The galaxy that had once been dominated by council bureaucracy and human compliance had been replaced by a voluntary association of equals working toward common goals. Ambassador Jake Morrison looked out at the stars from his office aboard New Geneva Station, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The price of independence had been high, but the rewards were beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The old Galactic Council had claimed to represent unity and cooperation,